Hi, everyone, and welcome to our closing session of Inclusive Excellence Week. I'm Alyssa Ayres, Dean of the Elliott School, and I know we've had a tremendous, fun, diverse set of conversations, games, films, and all kinds of topics that we've been covering this whole week. To close us out, we are going to talk about national security, and we're going to talk about next generation national security. So we're going to have a terrific discussion here. Let me introduce our two panelists. We are delighted to be able to welcome Camile Stewart and Boomi Akinusotu. Camile is a cyber and technology attorney. She's got substantial business, legal, and policy experience. She served in the Obama administration on Capitol Hill. She's served across the private sector at companies like Google and Deloitte. Camile brings specialized cross-cutting perspectives to bear on complex technology, cyber, and national security and foreign policy issues. She is committed to advancing the representation of the myriad of voices and lived experiences of the American people. Representation in our national security and foreign policy apparatus is a national security imperative. She dedicates much of her time to empowering others and making room for all voices in the national security, foreign policy, and tech sectors. We are also delighted to welcome Boomi Akinusotu. She is a first-generation American who spent countless hours listening to her Nigerian relatives argue and debate world politics. She was born and raised in the rebel state of Rhode Island. The idea of a world outside of America has always been part of her consciousness and is the motivation behind a lot of what she does. She's got many degrees, has worked for amazing organizations, and here I'm reading from her bio, she smiles at a dope Excel spreadsheet. She's a recovering collegiate volleyball player and the world's biggest Nina Simone fan, and has a love affair with Chicago. Now, by day, she is the deputy director of the Wrangell International Affairs program at Howard University, and she also is the host and producer of the foreign policy podcast, What in the World, at WITW Pod, as well as producer of her church's podcast, Savedish, at Savedish Pod. So let me ask both of our panelists to speak a bit about their current work and their perspectives on national security and international affairs. Camile, can we start with you?
Yeah, first, thank you for having us. And, we'll try to make this interesting because we're standing between you and this beautiful day. But I feel like national security can be fun. I'm more fun than that spreadsheet in Boomi's bio. So I'm looking forward to sharing, some insights with you all. So I work at Google right now. I'm the global head of product security strategy. And what that means is my team is the integration point for the security teams and all the products you know and love, the YouTubes and Androids of the world, and the central security team. So our goal, because Google is huge and each of those products could be their own business by themselves, is to leverage the efficiency of shared infrastructure through the central team, but also the agility and depth of understanding of a dedicated security team. And cybersecurity is one of those spaces that is very connected, both to the individual, but also to national and international outcomes. So one of the things I hope you all get from this conversation is that a place that you can do national security work is not only in the government or maybe in a think tank or academia. There are opportunities within the private sector to really still be touching these very critical national security issues. In the role prior to this, I built the election integrity program for our mobile business and was the head of security policy for Android and Google Play here at Google. I have done cyber national security privacy work at Deloitte, at DHS, on the Hill, and at a number of small cyber companies as well. So there are a lot of opportunities to engage on national security topics across industries.
I think it's an important reminder. It's not just government. There's a lot of opportunities in the private sector. Boomi, do you want to share with us your current work and your perspectives on the national security and international affairs field broadly?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much, Alyssa. And it's always great to be with my friend and colleague, Camile, and this opportunity to speak about not just myself, but this work is always exciting, and it's also a great way to break from the day as well. So I am the Deputy Director of the Wrangle program at the illustrious, the Mecca that is Howard University, and my role is to help the State Department identify and recruit and select amazing, outstanding professionals who want to go on to become diplomats. And we are in our 20th anniversary of the Wrangle program, the 30th anniversary of the Pickering program, and the 10th anniversary of the Payne program. So long-standing history, these programs of ensuring that the State Department looks like the United States. And my role in particular, I manage the selections process. So selecting the wonderful 45 people who will go on to become diplomats, and then also ensuring that they have all of the tools and resources they need before they go off to be prepared. So that's the graduate school support, the professional development around writing, working with the State Department clearance process, all of the gamut of activities that come before going off into the Foreign Service. And then when that's not enough, I run the Summer Enrichment Program, which is the undergrad component of the Wrangle program that exposes undergraduates to careers in international affairs. So I very much come at this from the diversity perspective, the professional development and pipeline perspective. Similar to Camile, though, I very much believe that the path to this work, or your lane here, doesn't have to be in government. Even though that's what pays my bills, I do believe that you can even do your own thing. So I had a podcast called What in the World, and that was my way of expressing my frustrations with what was happening, what I was seeing at that time, and still even till this day, with what the U.S. was doing around the world. But more so, I wanted to do two things. I wanted to amplify the amazing people like Camile, who were experts and who were not on CNN, they were not in the Washington Post, they weren't on PBS or NPR, but I knew they had great stories, and they knew what they were talking about and had recommendations and opinions. And so I wanted to create a platform for them to showcase their voice and their talents. And then the second thing is I just wanted Americans to just know what in the world was going on out there and how it affected their lives. Like, that was just it. And to not do it in a partisan way, to not, start fights. That was not my intention at all. It literally was like all these things that you see on television or that you read about, you may be like, just like, what in the world is going on? Like, why are we doing this? Why are we sending troops here? What does that mean? So I think that I come at this also from a perspective of you can create your own lane and lend your voice in a productive way to the conversation and influence people around you, even if you're not, an expert from State Department, or if you're, didn't have to go to grad school to do this, but you're just curious, right? So that's where I come from when it comes to this work.
So let me ask you both also to share with us, what kind of educational experiences, A, set you on your path, and B, were really important to preparing you for your path? Maybe Camile, back to you.
Sure. So I'm a lawyer, and that was like something that had to happen for me. I grew up making my parents sign contracts every time they asked me a question. And, but on the other side, my dad's a computer scientist. And so I grew up around technology. And so my career path and educational path has been about trying to find a way to marry the two things. Much like Boomi, I'm a first generation American. My family's from Jamaica. And so I came at all of those things through a global lens. And one of the great things about this space and about, the increase in technology is that career paths are not linear. And while there are traditional pathways that you can take, there are a lot of very interesting ways for you to blend your interests. And so for me, some of the foundational experiences that really helped are not necessarily about the degree, but about the skill sets that I was able to get exposure to and the muscles that I was able to start to strengthen, to recognize that these were the things I needed to focus on the first 5 years of your career, because the first 5 years of your career are about skill building. So I heard you guys did a memo writing exercise. I took a class in undergrad where he used to make us write memos very similarly. I mean, obviously in law school, I did a lot of writing, and writing is foundational. And a known secret if you're in the industry, but maybe not before you get there, is not everybody can write. And writing is so vital. So if you spend some time taking the hard class that makes you write the paper, that really makes you analyze the issues, that makes you formulate an opinion, that's going to be really helpful as you navigate this space, because having a perspective, particularly a fresh perspective, is what we need to meet the challenges of the moment. And so exercises and classes that allowed me to test assumptions and to articulate a perspective, analyze issues, analyze data, do research, communicate verbally, present, things like that. Those like toolbox skill sets that folks tend to not focus on are actually the things that added the most value, because once you have the research skill set, I can get up to speed on anything. Mm-hmm. Once I'm able to communicate myself, you can put me in any room and I'm able to figure out what's going on. And then those things lend themselves to stronger skill sets or more applicable skill sets, like the ability to negotiate and the ability to be a translator, whether literally by language or just in terms of folks' global and societal perspective in these rooms when you're having discussions around national security and foreign policy topics. So my encouragement to you all is not to be overly focused on what the degree is, but what you are seeking to cultivate and gain from that degree program and the exposure to people. Networking is going to be huge. You want folks who will walk into rooms that you're not in and say your name. And so to the extent that the programs that you choose allow you to meet folks like this conference is doing for you and get exposure to individuals who are already playing in the space and can be good thought partners and collaborators, those are the skill sets you should focus on.
Thank you. That's very, very helpful. Good reminders on the importance of skills for any kind of career path. Boomi, what would you offer?
Yeah, so I'm going to pick up on a thread that Camille mentioned about the skills piece in that first 5 years out. So I think even from grad school, you get this feeling like you're going to be influencing policy. You're going to be sitting at the table, like calling the shots. And the reality is you may just be building me a spreadsheet. Like, I'll just call it what it is. So going back to my background, my undergrad was in business and I was a computer information systems major. When my first job came out, I was an IT auditor. So databases and systems and security and Excel spreadsheets was how I was reared, probably starting from 8th grade. Before it was a thing for girls to code, I was coding. I was messing in early forms of Excel. So my mindset is very categorical, very technical. And I thought that I was going to go on and do, audit work and, sort of play in mainframes all day. Like, that's what I thought my life was going to be. I'd probably be making a lot more money if I did that. But nonetheless, I went on after that, my undergrad, and I actually got 2 master's degrees. The second master's degree, I frankly only got because I didn't know any better. And I don't regret it at all going to Columbia SIPA. It was great. I met my lifelong friends there. But like many people who can relate, I just didn't know how to break into the foreign policy, national security space. And to me, I thought grad school was the way to go. So, but my first master's degree, the 2 important skills that I learned there and just experiences, I was at Illinois State in the middle of nowhere of Illinois, and I learned fundraising. Which if you're going to work in the nonprofit sector, that's an important skill to have, and jobs are plentiful for fundraising and sort of that outreach, talking to people, which you're going to do again in life. And so I, in that time, became an AmeriCorps volunteer, and I was working on domestic issues. And so I honed my skills through my graduate program of how to support an organization from a management perspective. Like, how do you actually sustain a think tank or a nonprofit or any entity to make sure that they can actually do the work that they need to do. And then at Columbia, that's frankly where I got my field experience. So working in the Dominican Republic, working in East Timor, I was able to do media work. Before I even thought about podcasting, I was doing media work in East Timor, working with local radio stations. So that gave me exposure on how to just like come back down to earth with people and have conversations with people who are different from you, who see the world literally geographically differently from you, and to, apply the things that you learn in class. So I took peace building as a course, and then in the field, we had a chance to implement some of our peace building ideas. Program evaluation was another course that I took where I got a chance to apply those skills. Again, something that we don't talk about in this space are those organizational management components, right? That are so critical to sustaining a funder's requirements for your grant, or making sure a funder knows what you're doing and the impact that you're having. So those were the skills and the experiences and the academic sort of pieces that have really helped me with where I'm at today.
So can I ask, were there any trailblazers in particular, or people that you look to who helped inspire you to enter into careers that were more national security, international affairs focused? Back to Camile.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a lot of talented folks who are working in the national security space. But honestly, it was the absence of certain people that inspired me more, to be honest, right? It was the absence of people who looked like me. It was the absence of people with the legal and technical experience to bridge understanding true security issues and policy issues and create a dialogue between the two communities that had not been happening, right? Traditional legal lawyers were like looking at the compliance requirements around cybersecurity. What are your contractual obligations vis-a-vis some kind of a breach? And then there were policy folks over here, and really working with the security team and bridging that gap has been a place that I have been able to add the most value, particularly in a national security context, because if your security teams aren't actually thinking about this, the national and international outcomes we're trying to drive don't make sense and don't move forward. And so while there have been some like really amazing people, Colin Powell and others who were like real stalwarts and, you know, raised the flag and were doing amazing things, Barack Obama, all these people, it was the absence of a perspective, an absence of diverse voices in cybersecurity that actually propelled me more, because the reflection of the myriad of perspectives within our nation is our greatest asset in a national security context. And speaking from my area of specialty, from a cyber perspective, if we are ignorant to how things like systemic racism, systemic misogyny, systemic bigotry of any kind have impacted our foreign policy decisions, and then translate into how we can and do move now. So for example, we were making big efforts not to have Huawei be the infrastructure across the world. And on the continent of Africa, we were not as successful because of some of the historical, you know, decisions that we have made from a foreign policy context, and the investments we didn't make, and the room we created for China to get in there and to be the dominant voice in that region. And so, you know, recognizing that there was a need for somebody who's willing to say that and in any space is what pushed me into this space.
Thank you. Boomi, what about you? Anybody who inspired you?
I would ditto everything Camile said. And I would also say, as somebody who kind of came into the foreign policy space a little late in life, being surrounded by folks like Camile, like Laura Coupe, you know, we were all in the administration together. And so seeing and hearing about the things that they were doing, I was like, oh, I can do this, even though I, you know, don't have, you know, at that time, all the accolades and all the things. I saw Camile and Laura and so many others from afar. And so there's something that happens to you when you see your peers doing amazing things. And then I was at the EPA, again, in the administration. And one thing that stuck out to me about that experience was I was working on a G7 alliance that my superior was managing. I was again, I'm fresh out of grad school, but I had work experience, not government experience, but, you know, I'm helping him sort of manage his G7 counterparts. And my only job really was to kind of sit in the corner of a room. Everybody knows if you've worked in government and you're junior, you kind of sit in the corner room, you take your notes, you pass notes, whatever, right? And so his counterpart from Italy had asked about me. And was like, she carries herself so well. What is her role? And at that point, I was like 33, 34 years old at that time. And I'm thinking to myself, like, why would you assume anything less about who I am? So I don't have people, so to speak, but I have these moments that kind of remind me that this is where I need to be, so that people don't ask those types of questions anymore.
Yeah, and I would just love to just double down on that peer comment. When there's an absence of folks above you, your peers become that much more important. They should be a lifeline for you no matter what, but we have developed some really strong peer networks that sustain and enable, and it is no small thing to walk into any room and say systemic racism is a cause for XYZ, and to have folks stand with you and say that, and know that you're saying that they're saying that in parallel rooms that they're in, is a big thing, and why much of why we are in a space now where we are having frank conversations about diversity in this sector. And so I just wanted to double down on the amazingness of the peers like Boomi.
So I want to follow up and ask you just a couple questions each about your fields to help our students think about what they should be thinking about in the years ahead. Camile, do you want to opine a bit on where you see the cybersecurity field headed? What should our students be thinking about? What's coming down the pike?
Yeah, so one of the things that's really important to me is making clear the connection between individual actions and national and international outcomes. And we're seeing this across the national security space, where making these issues relevant for everyday Americans is becoming essential to making progress. That's why a podcast like Boomi's podcast was so important, because she was translating these things that people felt very disconnected from for everyday Americans. And so in cyber, as we see ransomware attacks run rampant, and it caused things like people not being able to get gas or not being able to get their meat because JBS Meats is, not able to produce or distribute. I think that is an opportunity for us to start a dialogue, to create a culture shift that engages each user, each individual in cybersecurity more. So that's one really important line of effort. Additionally, this is a space where the law and the policy is nascent. We are starting to figure it out. So there's a lot of work to be done to figure it out. And one of the most problematic things that I see is the assumption that something that has worked in the physical space is going to be a direct translation to cyberspace. And we've seen things on both sides of that. So sometimes you will see a law that was applicable in the physical space be more or less directly applicable in cyberspace, but there are enough and quite a few where that assumption that we should just apply something from another space to cyber has created so many holes, so many misconceptions, and a policy patchwork that doesn't actually move the needle in the ways that's intended. And so there will be a lot of opportunities to provide support at the highest levels in bridging that gap and changing that understanding. The folks on the Hill need help. They need folks who understand cybersecurity. And there are some great programs like Tech Congress that are bringing technology and security professionals to the Hill to support our members of Congress, but there's more needed. And as they get up to speed, as they make that more of their portfolio, as they have to tackle more of these technology and cybersecurity related issues, there will be a lot of work for everyone to do to figure out how we bridge the gap. And that is by identifying and focusing on the root cause you wish to solve. What we're seeing a lot now is, I'd love to solve the misinformation problem. We'll just ask for a bunch of reporting. Reporting doesn't change anything. Or, legislating for the manifestation of the moment, how Twitter does it, how Google does it, how whoever does it right now, doesn't help us solve either the truthfulness problem we're trying to solve, or the antitrust problems we're trying to solve, or whatever it is we are actually trying to solve. And so folks who can think critically and really identify what it is we as a society, as a nation, are deciding is our priority, and then translate that in this space so that we can create laws and frameworks that enable us to do that better are what we need. And there will be lots and lots and lots of opportunities there. So thinking about those three threads, you can definitely find a space that aligns with your interests, because that work is not only domestic, it is international, because the internet has no borders, right?
Yeah.
So we have to come together as a global society to kind of figure things out.
Boomi, what would you say is something that our students should be thinking about in the areas that you've worked in, specifically democracy and security, the environment and security? And you've got a bird's eye view, given everything that you see in your current role. How would you advise our students to be thinking ahead?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would baseline ask everyone to apply to become a Foreign Service officer. Just do it. Even if you don't get into Wrangell, Pickering, or Payne, that's okay. Like, just sign up to take the test. State Department did not pay me to be here, but I'm just saying that. Just saying, like, just sign up. And if you feel like diplomacy work is something that you see yourself doing, like, do the work to understand what that means. You can certainly reach out to me, talk to the diplomats in residence, so on and so forth. So I would say now is the time, in part because of the reckoning that's happening even at State Department, and all of the executive orders and memos, and this week they released an equity plan. So there's a lot happening at State Department and really in the Foreign Service ecosystem in DC that I think provides an opportunity for anybody who's interested in that space. The second thing is sort of, again, this point about localizing foreign policy. And I see a question in the chat about getting beyond the Beltway. And I love that question. And I believe that, foreign policy is going to be happening in Iowa. It's going to be happening in Cleveland. And we already see cities are starting to have offices of international affairs. I think right now there are like 13 cities in the United States that already have some sort of international affairs office. And if you come from a community that does not, here is your opportunity to pitch that. Right? Even if it's just something you do on the side, it's a passion project, being that local ambassador from your hometown, even if you live in DC, is phenomenal. And it's a great opportunity to sort of help this country get caught up on what is happening with US foreign policy. And I will say, parenthetically, one of the things with my podcast that I did sort of learn afterwards was the term foreign policy in and of itself doesn't resonate with people, right? That is a very DC Beltway term. And if I could do it all over again, I'd call it something else, like global affairs or something, but that word, that phrase can sometimes be, it has some stickiness that's not necessarily, it doesn't resonate with everybody. So I think that for folks who are interested in bridging the global and the local, just think about the terms. How we say things in DC doesn't necessarily mean you got to say it that way in, Newark, New Jersey. And thinking about the local factors, the thing that comes up with me, with the folks that I work with in the Wrangell program, particularly the undergrads, is, in my community, gun violence is an issue. Why should I care about what's happening in Ukraine, for example, if in my own neighborhood, it's like a war zone? That is a very valid point. And so I don't think our job is to tell people like, no, don't care about gun violence. No, our job is to say, okay, actually, do you want to know how gun violence is connected to the arms control issues? Do you want to know how misinformation impacts bullying, right? Like all of that, right? So I think that there's space for everybody to lend their own voice in a domestic context and connect that to the international.
I'm so glad that you went in this direction, because it's actually something that is really important for us here at the Elliott School. A few weeks ago, we hosted the mayor of Los Angeles, Mayor Garcetti, who has been extremely international in his focus for not just LA itself, but for the role that LA can provide with global city networks, particularly on issues like climate change. And for all of our students, we'll be hosting a workshop on April 27th that takes another look at cities in the international arena, because we are seeing an increased role of cities and states, but the city phenomenon is really gaining a lot of momentum. And in many ways, that's a kind of democratization of the foreign policy, international economic policy, and national security agenda. And there are an increasing number of opportunities for people with an interest in the international to apply that from within a city context. So we didn't coordinate, but thank you for the prompt on that, because it let me share a little bit about what we're going to be doing on April 27th. So thank you. Let me ask you both to speak a little bit about I think you'll both have some thoughts on this. How do you think that the National Security, Diversity, and Inclusion Workforce Act will improve diversity and inclusion in the NatSec arena? What would be your thoughts on this as a next step and as an evolution in where you see the field headed?
Well, before I answer that, I just want to add to what Boomi said about not forgetting your hometown, even if you, DC doing the work. Write for your local paper, particularly as you're in this stage of your career and you're trying to get your voice out there. You've done all the work we talked about to learn how to write and to analyze issues, and you learn the content, and you went and you were a foreign service officer, and now you're thinking about the next step. An opportunity to get your voice out there, your perspective out there, is to write and to get it out into the media. And your local paper is a great place to do that, because you can relate that to the issues that are happening in your community, and you can make those topics real. And people love to hear from somebody who came from where they came from. And so, that's a great opportunity for you as a professional who's developing, but also to give back. And then also in terms of this state and local opportunities, I mean, the US is huge. Yeah. And cities actually are more similar size to most other countries. And so there's a size scale dynamic where you can learn a lot there too, and actually get some context for your work and vice versa. So just two things I wanted to point out for that. As far as the legislation, I think it remains to be seen. So, there are some strong points in there, and hopefully there will be data that's gathered. And I think all of that is great, and it is a wonderful sentiment, but I am looking forward to seeing the action behind the sentiment. And I think that will be the true indicator of progress. If this becomes a report that sits on a shelf and little more, then we've done little to nothing. If it is a catalyzing function, that means that we are doing the introspective work in our institutions to understand what diversity brings and how the lack of it has impacted the work to now and how it should be reflected in the work going forward. And we are doing the work to open the pathways into government and institutions, then I'm happy. So it remains to be seen.
Boomi?
Absolutely. So I deal with this because we work with State Department. So this is constantly on our sort of radar. I read the thing, and yes, there's lots of data, lots of outreach, lots of looking at how people are promoted in government. I think it's all wonderful. My hope is that the original intent of how we describe sort of underrepresented populations does not get overshadowed by other issues. I'll just put it that way. If I can be blunt, speaking on behalf of myself, not the Wrangle program or State Department or anything, I think that there's a tendency to avoid the reality that in many cases, in most cases, underrepresented means racial and ethnic. And it does not mean reducing value. It does not mean changing standards. It doesn't mean reducing the quality of candidates or whatever. It simply means there are outstanding Black and Brown people who have historically been left out of the diplomatic corps, in this case, the State Department. And so what are the ways we can ensure that they have the same opportunity as others? And so my hope is that this legislation does that it actually reaches or impacts the populations that it was intended to, and it doesn't, and the sort of there isn't, what is it called, scope creep, doesn't overshadow the groups that should be included in this effort. So that's where I'm at with it. But I do agree with Camille that it's a great step forward. And I having worked in government, Camille knows this, working in government, it is not easy to turn the tide in government. It takes a long time. So I very much believe in grace with the government and mercy, because it's not easy. Some people can't even get like their households together, like never mind like entire government agencies. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this thing gets implemented in the various, particularly the diplomatic agencies that deal with foreign policy issues.
So this is probably the perfect moment to ask for you both to share a little bit of the history of the creation of NextGen NatSec, its predecessor organization, Diversity and National Security Network, how it came together, the agendas going forward.
Yeah, so after Obama's executive order on diversity and national security, a number of interested individuals and organizations started to convene and just talk about how we could turn the tide on diversity in national security and foreign policy spaces. And those meetings were awesome. People had so many great ideas. People were so passionate. But as you can imagine, in a room full of smart people with great ideas, there were just a lot of ideas going back and forth and less action, right? Or people would take some things back and start things, but the collective was having a hard time picking the things that needed to move forward. So Asha, Laura, and I got together and we're like, we have been talking about highlighting diverse talent in national security as a good first step to helping illuminate the fact that there are people already in these spaces who are diverse and doing the work at a high level. That's a piece we can manage. Let's do that. And so Diversity and National Security Network was born, and we decided to start highlighting and celebrating talented individuals. We did the first list in December 2018, and then did a series of lists across the Black community, the Latino community, MENA American community, Asian American communities. We were able to focus on mid-career in particular. That was a priority for us because one of the things we see in national security and foreign policy is there's a lot of focus on entry-level internships and trying to diversify the pipeline at that end, and a demand signal for there to be leaders that are diverse, but not a lot of cultivation of the people who have to get there. Also, it's all connected. Those entry-level folks are not going to stay if they don't see people like them thriving. And so what we wanted to do was really focus on that mid-senior to prop them up, to celebrate their work, and to frankly encourage them to keep going. We need you to keep going. And so we did that for a time. And then as the last election cycle was spun up, we were doing some work to support getting diverse talent into the administration and consulting on, how they could think about making sure that this administration was diverse. And on the heels of that, we decided that there needed to be two different lines of effort, right? Diversity and National Security Network would go on and continue to do a lot of policy platform things and work like that. And NextGen NatSec, our organization, would focus on the community aspect and really supporting the practitioners as they continue to move through this space. And Boomi and Marcus and Carrie and a few others joined us to really pour into the people, to create the support networks, to build mentorship programs with senior leaders in national security, to highlight them on Boomi's podcast, to, really focus on cultivating and elevating the talent, creating community, because as we talked about, national security is a networked space. And so being able to call on your colleague, being able to see what you needed to see in your peer if you're not seeing it above you, was something that we thought was really urgent and important, and a piece of that pie that we could carry the mantle on. And so that's the work that we've been doing. We have continued to engage in these broader spaces as well, right? Though that coalition of organizations, there are still a lot of good work that's coming out of that. There are a number of organizations that have also sprung up to continue to increase diversity in this space, and we celebrate all of them. But our goal is to make it so that Next Gen NASEC doesn't need to exist. I don't want to have to carry the mantle on this. I want it to be a mandate within every organization and a part of the ethos, and they created this inclusive environment such that there's no need for us to call attention to the people who are working in this space. And so that's what we continue to work towards.
And if I can just add something about what Camile said, just again, being inside, but also on the outside, all of the work that Camile and Laura and Asha and many folks did was unpaid, on top of their day jobs and on top of the last 2 years of a pandemic and all the things that occurred. And so to your question, Alyssa, about, what's the future, sort of how can students embed themselves? I would really encourage folks to really think about not starting a Next Gen NatSec per se, but what are the communities, what are the spaces that you can embed yourself in or create if necessary, that fosters that sense of connection. We're all human at the end of the day. We all need each other. And so I think the beauty of what has spun out of, what started in 2017, 18, the beauty of what came out of that is like, now I know I can pick up the phone and call Miriam or anybody and say, hey, I'm dealing with this thing. I need help. Or I saw this piece of legislation. I have no idea what any of it means. Can you help me interpret it? Right. So the beauty is, that they've created something on top of all the other responsibilities that they have, something that's going to be long lasting, far beyond the entity in and of itself.
And let me I can see in our attendees, we've got people who work on these issues as well. So we are open for questions or comments too. Please don't hesitate. And let me just follow this up. Do you see the network building also as helping to identify opportunities for jobs down the line too? Is that a piece of what you're also trying to support?
Yeah, I mean, the great thing is building this community takes a life of its own. So people share jobs, people share opportunities, people make recommendations, people use the community to do the work themselves and perpetuate things. So yes, it is a space that can be many things, but definitely as a conduit for job opportunities and expansion of that.
We have a question that's just come in from Professor Arturo Sotomayor, who is the director of our Security Policy Studies program. He writes, pipeline programs are excellent means to enhance diversity and inclusion, but they have some limits too. For instance, the McCain Fellowship and the Cybersecurity Scholarship programs are DoD pipeline programs, but they haven't been fully successful at attracting more diverse candidates. From your perspective, what is missing? And related to this question, how early should we start engaging students into security studies?
Yeah, I don't mind taking this on because I get this a lot. Being at Howard, I get just about every day, I'm hit up by people wanting to get to Howard students. And, respectfully, there are many other HBCUs, and also there are many other schools, institutions that have Black student unions, Latino student unions. There's sort of pockets within other universities, your own alma mater, you can go back to and talk with the head of, student affairs or whoever at your school. So I just wanted to put that out there. I know Howard is hot, we're great, but there are many other schools that also deserve the attention. So having said that, what is missing? So I think particularly with DOD, right, and foreign policy as well, you have to remember, and I'm sure, I can't remember his name, Arturo is a professor, so I'm sure you know the history of these organizations and their interaction with Black and Brown communities has not always been great. So there is a historical barrier that we have to acknowledge, that Black and Brown folks, you know, aren't going to be the first to jump necessarily at an opportunity to work for DOD or CIA or whatever, right? And just given just history. So there's one thing to think about. But then two, if you're looking at pipeline programs and we're talking about individuals who are now Gen Z, maybe younger millennials, they are now looking at Google, Amazon, Microsoft, you name it, all these other firms, right, as opportunities for economic, sustainability. And so the challenge is, and we're dealing with this with our programs, how do you pitch the value of public service to a young person who can easily call up Camile and be like, I want to work on your team, right? And they make tons and tons of money. So how do you frame the value of public service? And that's what we do. We frame it as public service. You are doing good for your country. You are supporting your community in this way by making a difference around the world. Like that's our talking point. So I would put that out there as you know, just something to think about, is how are you framing the opportunity to begin with. And then the third piece, which I sort of have learned through my role now, is relationships, right? So it's not enough to just send someone like me or another professor a flyer or a link to a Zoom session and say, send me students. You, if you're invested in truly building diverse candidates, because of the first point that I made, you have to build relationships, unfortunately, with lots of individual people, whether it's individual students, professors, you know, administrative staff. The world is opening up a little bit. So I tell people, if you really want to get to Howard, pull up, like come up to 6th Street, come to the Quad, show up to, you know, the political science department or wherever, and really start to build the relationships, and know that the result is not going to come next semester or next year. It may take a couple of years before you are able to see a difference, but know that relationships are really, really important to building sort of this pipeline for these very important programs. So that's what I believe is missing. And so how early should we start? That's debatable. I mean, I think college is a great place to start, you know, freshman year, getting in front of students, you know, and talking about this career when they're impressionable is good. You know, high school might be a stretch, but, you know, there are now lots of, I know, high school programs. And students, frankly, because they're more diverse in this generation, they're already exposed to so much diversity to begin with, of people from around the world. I don't think it's that hard to pitch, you know, the concept. But I think that college freshman year is a good place to start talking about your program.
We've got a great, oh, sorry, Camille, were you going to say something else?
Yeah, I would love to add to that. So I think this goes back to the problem we talked about of folks not feeling connected to these issues. And so they don't even know that this is in the realm of the possible. Aside from the problem that Boomi talked about in terms of folks having to choose between tech jobs and national security jobs, there are a lot of people who do not have any access or exposure to this work and have no idea what it is. And so therefore it is not even in the realm of the possible, because they will not have heard that this is a path that's open to them. And while programs like the DoD program might be beneficial, they're not talking to inner city communities or not connected to them in the ways, and despite the historical context, the modern day context means that they just have no context on these pipeline programs. And so even if they would help them bridge any of the financial gaps and other things, you can't apply for what you never heard of. So that's one thing. Also, I think there are a lot of opportunities for us to get creative with how we partner with industry. Like, industry also will benefit from that experience in government. And so figuring out ways to exchange talent, or to, you know, be able to take a sabbatical to go do some government service for 2 years and come back and get a role. Those are things that can be negotiated. And I have seen industry be open to it, increasingly so.
Like through an IPA agreement that can give somebody that
Yeah,
government exposure come back.
And even rewarding it, which they should, right? Like exposure to how government works, and you're coming back to lead a trust and safety program at a tech company that does global policy work for a tech company. That's a relevant experience and should be rewarded as such. And you could negotiate programs like that. There's a huge narrative problem where folks don't know this work exists, need to feel connected to it, and opportunities for us to get creative.
Should say, that's something that we've been thinking about here too. I mean, in so many ways, the experience of the pandemic, I think, has helped highlight how international affairs is relevant for everybody in our individual lives. It's thinking about a disease, a pandemic, but it's also thinking about trade and economics and supply chain security and the ways we're interconnected in education and migration and all the kind of dominoes that we learned about, that we knew about, but they maybe weren't connected in the same ways in our minds. For me, thinking about our school and what we do, I feel like we have an opportunity to really bring forward how much international affairs matters to everybody, but making sure that we can tell that story and how important this field is. It's just a good reminder. We need to tell the story everywhere. We've got another, sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
There are organizations like Girl Security who are making national securities relevant for young women and bringing them into the conversation early. And in partnerships with organizations like that, get your program as part of that dialogue and make those connections early, because I personally think they have to happen a lot earlier than they're happening.
And
so you'd say
kids.
earlier than college, you'd say.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Global Kids is another, similar to Girl Security. Global Kids is another great program. And now they're national in scope, that you can start earlier than college if you'd like.
Okay, we've got a great question from Meg Worm. Meg is one of our graduate advisors. And the question is, what support do you wish that you would have received in graduate school or early in your career?
I wish somebody had told me, or I wish I had access. So diplomats in residence, I didn't know who those people were until like I was 30 years old. I was like, what is a diplomat in residence? So I wish I had known about that, sort of those types of folks and their jobs early on in my career. I wish they had come up to my school when I was an undergrad. So I wish I had known about that. But the other thing I wish I had known about earlier was how you can like truly make this your own path outside of government. Like you could, I think in the advent of coming up, I would think we're the social media generation. So like, with Facebook and all these things, like we just had an opportunity to sort of create content and share our voices and our opinions in very different ways than I think our predecessors. And so I wish I had known earlier that I could even just like write an op-ed for that matter, and just share about what's happening in my community, just so I get that practice and talking about the issues that I care about. And I would say the last thing is field work, right? I think while my family is Nigerian and I had been to Nigeria, I was traveling abroad for family. I wasn't like, I didn't do mission trips or anything like that. So I wish that somebody had told me early on, like you may want to do more field experience out to learn about how all of the pieces connect to one another. That's sort of things that are top of mind.
Yeah, definitely.
Really important one. I don't think they had the context though, right? I don't think they knew that things would change enough that we could create new pathways and new opportunities in traditional spaces. But I think many of us felt limited and maybe even smothered by traditional paths that were like thrust upon us. But for the willingness to kind of step outside of that, we would not have been able to do the things that we're doing. The other thing that like really resonates is I I really wish that I had understood just how many opportunities were available to me outside of the like school context and how those could enhance that experience. Yes, you knew that you could do like a study abroad program and that like whatever opportunities where your school of practice were available. But one, I wish I'd had exposure to the other schools around the university and what they had to offer and how it could have been a more interdisciplinary, study, or how I could engage with something completely different through like a extracurricular activity as opposed to having to make it part of a major or minor. But then also these programs like the ones we shared, Global Kids and Girl Security and the college and grad school equivalents that could have just brought some additional perspective, that if you had the time and the brain space to do something additional, you could have done them. Those are things I wish I knew more about.
Those extracurricular activities are great opportunities to hone the leadership skills too. I should note here, we've got a note from our professor Jennifer Brinkerhoff in the chat. She says, stay tuned for a resource that can provide support from pipeline to mid-career and to leadership, a collective effort of many of the Black American giants who blazed the trail. Out this summer, it's a forthcoming book, The Young Black Leader's Guide to a Successful Career in International Affairs, What the Giants Want You to Know. That is co-authored by Aaron Williams, Taylor Jack, and Jennifer Brinkerhoff. So very excited about that coming out this summer. We have just 2 minutes left before we come to a close. Let me just offer you each the opportunity to, if you have any other words of advice for our students to consider, some of whom will be graduating in the next month, some of whom may have more time with us to consider what else they might want to pursue in the international affairs, national security space, but any general words of advice you might have on national security and maintaining the momentum.
If I can just add something to one, I want to know about that document or whatever that's being produced this summer. I would love to take a look at it and speak with the folks who are putting it together. I think
we can help. We can help.
Yes. And then also I want to put a plug in for the student athletes. I know maybe these are graduate students we're dealing with, but if there are any professors or advisors on here, if you are not interfacing with student athletes at your school, please do, because they're often tied up in practice and games and study hall and all these things, and they miss out on opportunities like this or miss out on information that the general population of students gets. So if you know student athletes, because I was one, and I think that's part of the reason why I didn't know anything, is because I was pouncing a volleyball everywhere. So I just want to put a plug out there for student athletes. But my overall insight stems from a conversation that I had this morning with 3 Wrangle Fellows who are going to become diplomats, and they had a lot of anxiety around all the things, right, that come with transitions in life. And I guess my word for everyone is to just count your blessings and be thankful for where you are and all the things that you've accomplished, and trust that the next step will work out just fine. And if it doesn't, you'll be okay. Like, I think that this town is very high performing, full of high performing individuals, amazing schools like the Elliott School, pump out lots of great people. And I think that there's a tendency for us to feel like we have to have it perfect. We have to have all the right answers. We have to take all the right steps. We have to know all the right people. We have to wear the right clothes. We have to read the right journals, right? All of this stuff. And I think it sometimes we miss the outstanding accomplishments and the outstanding achievements that we've had and the things that have gotten us to this point. So that's my reflection to the folks who are graduating. Be proud of yourself. Take a moment to celebrate where you're coming from and the things that you've done while you were in school, and don't be afraid to help somebody else out after this point.
Thank
Great
you, Camille.
Yeah, great point. Don't be too busy beating yourself up because you missed that one opportunity to see the other. There are so many, and that one likely wasn't yours. My last piece of advice is you are going to continue to be exposed to some amazingly talented and accomplished people through the Elliott School, whether you got 1 week left or you've done it, or you still have 4 years ahead of you, or 3 years, I guess, at this point ahead of you. And as you transition into your career, and take the opportunity to make a connection, to make a bold ask, to really seek to learn, whether for a moment, I like to call them mentorship moments, or a sustained engagement with someone. But expand your network. There's so much to be learned from other people's journeys. I do hope that you've seen through Boomi and I that, you know, you can have major accomplishments without the more traditional pathways in this space and in other spaces. And so keeping your network broad allows you to see that, and allows you to identify those new and different opportunities that pull together all the things that you're passionate about. And so leverage that. It can be scary, it can be overwhelming to just keep walking up to new people, but like for every no, there's probably 10 yeses. Most people want to help. And so take them up on that.
That's great advice. So let me thank both of you for your leadership, for being role models in the field, and for inspiring so many. Thanks for spending an hour with us today and helping to inspire our students. And we look forward to following up and staying in touch. And have a great weekend.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Bye.